Hello, everybody. We're back for the 50-state haunt, Louisiana. Hello, I'm Brent, and this is Strange Embers. First, I want to apologize. It's been a week off or so. I did post a video that I had put on the other channel that I had started, and I posted it over here to move that content over because the other channel is going to stay there as a backup channel, but it isn't going to be used for now. And the reason why is I'm going to let Scott tell you the reason why.
Hey guys, it's Scott. I am recording this post-recording for the last episode, or this one that you're watching now, rather, that Brent has recorded. I hate to say it, but this is going to be my last appearance on the podcast. It's rather bittersweet feeling that I have. I have a lot of things going on personally that I need to handle and take care of. And currently my time and my dedication cannot be to give you guys the quality content that you deserve. So Brent's going to continue. He's going to keep bringing you episodes. I'm not saying that I'll never be back, because I'll probably be back for an episode here and there. I want to thank everybody who has been here for us, everybody that supported us, everybody that's lifted us up. But besides that, Brent, I'm gonna let you take the reins, man. And this is Scott signing off.
All right, everybody. Well, as Scott said, that was pre-recorded. He is actually not on here with me at the current time, so he did want to record that for y'all and say goodbye. And I also want to say to Scott, which I know he's listening, I enjoyed his time here with me. I can't wait for him to come back and be on some episodes with me in the future, and I look forward to doing more episodes with him again one day. Hopefully it'll be sooner than later. But, Scott, thank you for being here with me as long as you was, brother. I appreciate you. So carrying on. Louisiana, 50-state haunt. These are going to be different because obviously Scott's not here with me, and the banter that we would kind of talk about some of these things is not going to be there. So it's new territory. I'm going to feel my way through it. We'll go with it and see what happens. But to kick this off, we're going to be talking about the Gothic jail of D. Riddler. D. Riddler is a town in Louisiana. A little bit of history of the town. In D. Riddler, they had a booming timber industry and a railroad that made a stop in the town put D. Riddler in the Beauregard Parish on the map in the early part of the 20th century. With sawmills popping up and the town expanding, local leaders opted to have a grand structure constructed inside of the town as something that the town could be proud of having, something special. Colonel William Lewis Stevens was hired to design and build not only the parish courthouse, but also the jail that was right next door to it, which this would be connected by a secret underground tunnel. The 3-story structure of sandblasted concrete with a small tower and a terracotta roof. It had a spiral staircase. It had toilets in each cell And construction was complete in 1914, 1915 at a cost of roughly $168,000 US. What that would translate to now in today's money, that would have been about $5,297,000. So the walls on this jail ranged anywhere between 13 to 21 inches thick, and it was designed to hold 13 prisoners comfortably, but it could house up to 50 people. The reinforced concrete jail had a spiraling staircase that went up a central tower. There were very steep gables and arches and barred windows as well. The jail was considered modern for its time because it had toilets and showers, cell windows as well. There was a jailer's quarter on the bottom floor as well as a kitchen. So as said before, there was an underground passage that was made that went between the courthouse to the jail to be able to bring prisoners back and forth without having to be out in public and out and about. A large section of the underground tunnel that was there was filled in during a renovation of the parish courthouse that was next door, but there is still a small section of the tunnel that you can still see to this day. The first floor housed the jailer and his family, while the second floor were isolation cells or death cells, and a woman's cell on the third floor was designed for trustees or long-timers. So the jail was added to the National Register of Historic Places on December the 17th of 1981. It was closed by the state fire marshal 3 years later. So that's a little bit of history of the jail. There are several ghost stories that go along with this jail. One being of a jailer that he's said to still be there, and they'll see him on they have seen him on the front porch smoking a cigar. And the other one is said to be of two young men that were hung in the jail for the crimes that they committed back then. And that is what actually gave the jail its nickname of the hanging jail. So I would like to present the story of what happened for this jail to get its nickname. So we're going to go back to Saturday night, August the 28th of 1926. 25-year-old Joe Genna and 26-year-old Milton Brasso, they had decided that they were done living in D. Riddler, and they had made a plan with each other to rob a cab driver and to steal his car and go to Texas. They had also already acquired some Texas license plates to put on the car that they were going to steal as well, just so you know how much of this plan that they were actually involved in, that they made steps previously to make this happen. So they got a cab driver by the name of Joe Breville. They got into Joe's cab with the intent to carry out their plans. They got Joe to drive them all the way out into the country, and when they got out to the location of where said crime would take place, one of the men, which through the stories of that, the testimonies that both the men gave, we don't know for sure who was actually in the front seat and who was actually in the back seat. And so that's the reason I say one of the men who was sitting in the back of the cab, he struck Joe in the back of the head with a steel leaf spring. And for those that don't know what a leaf spring is, it's a long, slender, arched piece of steel that's used in a car suspension to help absorb the impacts of bumps in the road, stuff like that, to soften the ride. So he had one of these leaf springs and hit Joe in the back of the head with it. So the man in the front of the cab, he held Joe to keep him from getting away because obviously he was struggling and trying to get away. So he held him to keep him from escaping, while the other man beat Joe with the leaf spring. So as Joe struggled and cried for help and tried his best to get away, he begged for mercy But one of the men then drew out either a knife or a screwdriver and stabbed Joe in the heart with it. And then they cut his throat. This did happen in the Beauregard Parish, and that is where later they found a bloody cap that was Joe's cap, and they also found a bloody shirt sleeve and a handkerchief that wasn't identified as to whose that was. So then the men proceeded to push Joe to the side of the driver's seat, and one of them got in the driver's seat of the car, and they drove back towards D. Riddler. So through all of this, and through taking Joe's life, they did steal his car, obviously, and they robbed Joe of $14, which in today's money would be equivalent to about $441. Just before arriving to D. Riddler, they had turned on another road and went into the Vernon Parish and went about 20 miles into there. That's where they dumped Joe's body into a mill pond. For those that don't know what a mill pond is, it could be a watershed, like a lake. Usually when it's called a mill pond, it's usually around which was up there around a sawmill. And it was a lot of those were like man-made lakes close to sawmills. They dumped his body into that pond. Then they returned to D. Riddler. They went, gathered their clothes, and then proceeded to Toulouse. That's where they would pick up 2 women before heading on their way to Texas. So Sunday morning, August the 29th, they arrived in Toulouse, and they met up with the young women. Genna stayed there with one woman, while Brasso drove with the other woman to Vissla on Sunday, and they returned on Monday, August the 30th. On Monday night, the 2 women that they had went to pick up, they were arrested for stealing an automobile. And it wasn't the automobile that the men had drove over that they had stolen. But they were arrested for stealing yet another car. So whenever this happened, Brasso, he left immediately and he went to Monroe. And then he went back to Lake Charles. And then he went to his home in Sulphur. He made it there by Wednesday night. And that's where he was arrested on Thursday afternoon. So to back up again, as Brasso left, when Genna stayed in Toulouse, on Monday, the women were arrested, and then hours after their arrest, at around 5 a.m. on Tuesday morning, he broke into the jail and he released the 2 women. Then the 3 of them went in Joe's cab back to D. Riddler. And that's where they picked up a man named Harvey Perkins. And they went off to Lake Charles to cross the Sabine River on a ferry near Orange, Texas. That is where Genna set the cab on fire, burned it up right there, and then he got on the ferry and crossed, going to Orange, Texas. He arrived there on Wednesday morning, and that's where he was arrested at by Thursday morning. They had him back in D. Riddler and in the jail by Thursday night. Genna had made his confession that night, with already admitting his murders to Harvey Perkins and to one of the women being Katie Sadler. The other woman's name was Edna Sadler. She didn't know about the murders until later when Perkins had told her about it. But she was suspicious that something had happened because there was blood splattered all about inside of the car. So the body of Joe Breville was found sometime during the day of Monday, August the 30th. And so after his body was found, the people of D. Riddler, the only thing they knew at that point in time was that Joe's car was still missing. At the time of the crimes, Genna was 23 and Brasso was 24. So after both of them were arrested and they gave their confessions, between both of their confessions and the found evidence that they had worked out what had happened that night, except for one detail. And that was that each one of them, as they told it, both of the stories matched up. The only thing that didn't match was each man turned on the other one. Genna said that Brasso was the one that killed Joe. Brasso said that Genna was the one that killed Joe. So we don't know who exactly was the one with the leaf spring or was the one that cut Joe's throat. We just know that they were both involved. After they were arrested, Genna originally tried to claim insanity. And so whenever the insanity plea was presented, they evaluated Genna, they evaluated Brasso as well, and they came to the conclusion through the evaluations that both of them were of sane mind and knew what they were doing, and they would carry on with the trial. So after that happened, Brasso, he also tried to have a change of venue as well, because they were saying that with the information of the case that was out there, that neither one of them would be able to have a fair trial because of the newspapers putting out information that they did, and because of the large crowds that had gathered at the jail to find out what's going on. They both said that they needed a change of venue for their safety plus a fair trial. The judge took this into account, and he evaluated the situation, and what was said was that he was going to deny the motion because the crowd that had gathered there was orderly. Nobody was causing any kind of problems, and most of the crowd consisted of what would be considered to be some of the best people in the town. They were there because they all genuinely wanted to know who was arrested for the crime and to see what happened. And some of them were also there for the examination of the jurors, for their voir dire, which that is the process of selecting the jurors. So they did decide to do the two men. They's going to try them separately. Genna's trial began on October the 11th of 1926, and a jury convicted him. 4 days later, Brasso's trial began, and after his trial, it only took the jury 3 days to return with a guilty verdict for him as well. They were both sentenced to death for later that year. So the murder and the legal proceedings of this case made newspaper headlines for over a year and a half. The trials and the hearings were said to be jam-packed with onlookers. Hanging was a legal method of execution at the time, and it was legal in Louisiana up until the 1940s. And it would also be the first double execution in Beauregard, according to a March 9th, 1928 Lake Charles American Press story. So leading up to their death sentence, hours before it was going to take place, Genna decided to try to expedite his by swallowing 10 or more tablets of an unknown medicine, but he was unsuccessful. Robert R. Faxon was a Lake Charles American Press reporter who covered the trials and the executions. He went on to author a book about the murder. It's called The Breville Murder, with detailed accounts of the trials of Joe Genna and Moulton Brasso. Faxon wrote, quote, Genna, 25 years of age, was the first to go. Based on the relative physical condition of the men, he, weak and still suffering from the effects of the poison he took yesterday, was the first to mount the scaffold. It was a makeshift gallows across the third floor stairwell, led by Deputy Sheriff Jim Crumpler. Genna mounted the platform at 12:54. The trap was sprung at 12:55, and he was pronounced dead at 1:06 from a broken neck. End quote. In the book, whenever he got to the part about Brasso, it went as, quote, jail-worn, agitated, mentally torture-wrecked, and strained under the load of taut nerves and a fear-crazed mind. But still Carrying an air of defiance, Brasso, 1 year older than his companion, was led out by Deputy Sheriff Gill. Brasso took his place in the gallows at 1:14. The trap was sprung at 1:17, and at 1:29 he was pronounced dead from a broken neck. Joe Genna and Moulton Brasso had paid the price at the bar of justice for the murder of Joe Breville. End quote. Faxon had concluded Breville, who was just 45 at the time of his murder, he was buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery in De Riddler. A newspaper report notes that he left a wife and a 10-year-old son. So the executions gave the Gothic jail that was built in 1914 its grim nickname of the Hanging Jail. A freelance writer by the name of Christine Smith, who she had passed away in 2007. She was also a photographer whose work was published in magazines like Louisiana Life and Southern Living. A photograph that she took of the jail was purchased by the city of De Riddler, and it can be seen today in the Beauregard Museum. Some see a ghostly image on it. If you'll look at the screen, there is a picture that we're talking about on there right now. And if you'll look at on the jail's porch, you'll see an image that a lot of people still say to this day that is the image caught of the ghost of the jailer on the front porch smoking a cigar. If you ever do decide to visit this place, and they did make a short film there to portray the executions. The film, as far as I found anywhere, it didn't go out any further than it was filmed just to be played there on site in the museum so you could get a visual of what the story is. There's also still a noose hanging right in the middle of the tower that you can still see if you visit it today. And if you go, keep an eye out on that porch. See if you can see the jailer out there for yourself. Well, everyone, that is the story of the Hanging Jail of De Riddler, Louisiana. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And I do apologize again for the long delay between episodes, but just trying to get some stuff worked out, figure out what I'm going to do going forward. Again, everybody go to the comments. Everybody tell Scott goodbye for the time being. Or shall we say it's not goodbye, but it's until we see him next time. And everybody else, have a good night.